The roots of this imbalance stretched back to American industry. Before the war, the U.S. Army Ordnance Department had partnered with private factories to design a supply chain capable of mass production. The Naval Ammunition Depot at Hastings, Nebraska, opened in 1942 on 48,000 acres of farmland. Within months, 10,000 workers were producing more shells per week than Japan could manufacture in a year. The facility turned out 40% of the Navy's total ammunition, including the 5-inch shells that became the backbone of destroyer firepower. What astonished visiting inspectors was the quality control. Every batch tested, every defect discarded. Japan, starved of steel and plagued by bombing, sometimes issued shells so poorly made that they exploded prematurely in the barrel. On the battlefield, the difference was night and day. At Guadalcanal in 1942, Japanese gunners measured each round, fearing shortages. American Marines, by contrast, fired artillery in boxes, patterns designed to saturate an area regardless of visibility. One Marine officer recalled, "We used artillery like a garden hose. If we weren't sure where the enemy was, we just drenched the jungle." Japanese survivors called it drum fire, a ceaseless pounding that shattered nerves as much as bodies. One lesser-known fact comes from Japanese interrogations after the war. At Saipan, in June 1944, captured officers admitted they believed American ships must carry factories aboard. "We could not understand," one said, "how a fleet could fire all day and all night, and never stop. We thought they had hidden workshops making shells at sea." The truth was simpler and more devastating. The U.S. Navy's logistics system, with oilers, ammunition ships, and floating depots, kept fleets supplied indefinitely. In fact, during the Marianas Campaign, the ammunition ship USS Rainier delivered 5,000 tons of shells, more than Japan's entire monthly naval ammunition output, just to one task force. On land, Japanese soldiers faced similar disbelief. At Iwo Jima, the preliminary bombardment lasted 9 days. American battleships, cruisers, and destroyers fired 22,000 shells. When the Marines finally landed, Japanese defenders emerged from bunkers stunned but alive, only to face an even greater terror. Every Marine regiment brought with it dozens of 105mm howitzers. Each could fire 3 rounds per minute. With hundreds deployed, the island echoed with a continuous roar. One Japanese lieutenant wrote before his death, "Their guns fire until the barrels glow red. We fire until we have nothing, then we wait." Even small details carried meaning. American shells often bore factory markings, letters stamped into brass casings. Japanese prisoners, shown these casings, were bewildered to learn that one came from Pittsburgh, another from St. Louis, another from San Francisco. To them, it was proof that the entire American continent had become an arsenal. Meanwhile, Japanese factories struggled to deliver basic munitions. In 1945, one Japanese infantry division in China reported that only 1 in 3 rifles had a full ammunition load. Soldiers trained to fight with bayonets because bullets were too precious. Perhaps the most astonishing contrast lay in anti-aircraft fire. At the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, later called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, American ships expended over 470,000 rounds of 20mm and 40mm ammunition in 2 days. Gunners fired so fast that barrels melted, and still the magazines never ran dry. Japanese pilots reported that approaching the American fleet was like diving into a volcano. One pilot's diary described the sky as filled with burning ropes of fire, so dense that there was no space between them. By comparison, Japanese anti-aircraft units were restricted to short bursts, 3 to 5 rounds per target, to conserve stockpiles. The industrial math was merciless. By 1944, the U.S. was producing over 100,000 artillery rounds per day. Japan, crippled by bombing and shortages, produced a fraction of that. The Naval Ammunition Depot at McAllister, Oklahoma, alone manufactured more shells in 1 month than Japan produced in an entire year. German analysts later remarked that Japan had essentially fought the Pacific War with a World War I-sized ammunition industry. But the real shock for Japanese soldiers wasn't just numbers. It was the psychology of endless firepower. At Okinawa, American gunners fired 1.9 million artillery shells in 82 days, the heaviest concentration of artillery in the Pacific. Entire hillsides disintegrated. Trees shredded into toothpicks. Soldiers buried in caves felt the earth shift above them, hour after hour, day after day. Survivors later said the greatest terror was not the shells that landed, but the knowledge that they would never stop. "We prayed for silence," one private wrote. "It never came." There were moments of almost surreal contrast. At Guadalcanal, American gunners once practiced by firing at empty jungle, simply to calibrate angles. They expended more ammunition in practice than Japanese regiments received in a month. On Saipan, Marines joked that artillery barrages were their alarm clocks, waking them with thunder each morning. German observers attached to Japanese units reported home that American artillery was mathematical, calculated without concern for economy. One even wrote, "They treat shells as we treat rainwater, falling without limit." And yet, this torrent was not wasteful. The American doctrine of combined arms, artillery supporting infantry, ships supporting landings, planes spotting targets, meant each shell had purpose. One statistic underscores it. During the Normandy campaign in Europe, the U.S. Army averaged 25,000 artillery rounds per day. In the Pacific, though terrain was harsher, the intensity often matched or exceeded this. By contrast, Japanese reports complained of rationed fire. Gunners ordered to withhold shots unless certain of hits. The result was tactical paralysis. By war's end, Japanese soldiers had learned the truth. Courage could not stop mathematics. Their diaries, recovered after battles, speak less of fear of the enemy soldier and more of awe at American firepower. One wrote, "We did not fear their men. We feared their shells. They never ceased, like the ocean." Another compared it to the wrath of gods, indifferent and inescapable. When surrender finally came, many Japanese officers reflected that artillery, not tanks, not planes, not even atomic bombs, had broken their armies. Endless shells crushed morale, shredded defenses, and revealed the true power of industrial war. They had entered the conflict believing spirit could overcome material. But at Leyte, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and dozens of forgotten islands, they discovered the opposite. Material had drowned spirit. In the final tally, America's endless artillery was more than firepower. It was a symbol, a reminder that the war was decided not just by bravery or strategy, but by the ability to produce, transport, and fire without limit. For Japanese soldiers staring into the inferno, it was not just defeat they witnessed, it was disbelief. How could one nation summon so much iron, so many shells, so much power? The answer lay thousands of miles away, in factories and depots that never slept, in assembly lines that rolled day and night, in a democracy that had turned itself into an arsenal. To the men who faced it, it seemed less like war and more like the end of the world.